Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Ushanka Show, stories about life in the Soviet Union. In my recent videos, we talked a lot about Soviet public transportation and Soviet buses in particular, so today let's switch gears. Today I want to tell you about my favorite Soviet-era magazine, which was not available for everyday consumer, and it was called Зарубежное военное обозрение, Foreign Military Review. My family subscribed to several magazines as well as newspapers, and I covered this topic in my old video which I recorded about 3 years ago called Newspapers in the USSR, review of my family's newspaper subscriptions, and link will be below in the comment section. But speaking of magazines, my dad never subscribed to any magazines. But my mom liked to be subscribed to magazines Здоровье, Health, and Работница, the working woman. Meanwhile, Зарубежное военное обозрение, Foreign Military Review, was like a limited circulation magazine available only to the Soviet Army and Navy officers. So they would subscribe to their military outfits, maybe get them in the library, but you couldn't just subscribe as a regular Soviet citizen. Fortunately, two of my best friends, both were Russians, Alex on the left and Valera on the right, came from the military families, so their fathers were Soviet Army officers that got transferred to Kiev, and both subscribed to that magazine, so I had access to that magazine when I visited them, or Alex quite often brought older copies to my place, and I was all over them. I don't know why, but I had been always fascinated with military equipment, especially tanks, and of course I'm talking about early 1980s, way before the world of tanks craze. I don't know how many of you had a chance to watch my older video about my strange hobby when I was a kid. When I was like 4th grade, so it's about 12, 13-year-old, I wrote a couple of fairy tales, сказки, called Garik and Harik. That's the names of two main characters. They were dwarves, and link will be again in the comment section. And that's all, of course, about war between good guys and bad guys. And I decided that I need to create equipment for both sides. And here are some examples of my drawings. So this is a heavy tank Jaguar. So that's for the bad guys. With all the details about caliber of cannon, how powerful the engine, 700 horsepower, speed, how far it can go on a tank of fuel, and the view from the top, view from the front, view from the side. Everything legit. Light tank Leopard. Once again, 50mm caliber automatic gun, one large caliber machine gun, 10 people can fit into the compartment, 450 horsepower engine, speed 60 kilometers an hour, tank is light and could swim. I even created self-propelled howitzers, once again 150mm automatic cannon, up to 25 kilometers the distance of the shooting, one large caliber machine gun, engine, speed. So quite a lot of details for everything I created for my bad guy. I even created the minesweeper as well, and now I'm kind of thinking it's kind of bizarre because a lot of equipment that I drew back in the early 1980s, this is what's being heavily used now in modern day war between Russia and Ukraine. Look at that. I even had an anti-tank rocket, distance between 300 to 4,000 meters, and it's used for destroying tanks, self-propelled howitzers, trucks, and motorcycles. So looking at those drawings, you can imagine how fun it was for me to explore pages of Foreign Military Review magazine, especially where they showed the colored picture of foreign tanks from all over the world, not just the NATO countries, but as far as Brazil, and I just loved it. And when I got hands on the new copy, I usually skipped first 10 pages because all that was just a bunch of propaganda. You know, some Soviet political officer will be writing about, you know, the great purpose of Warsaw Pact and how the Soviet army protecting Soviet Union from aggressive NATO pact. I cared about less about that stuff. I was going right away for the color centerfold, where it was the beautiful pictures of tanks, jets, bombers, submarines, and so on. And I must say that poring over pages of that magazine made me very knowledgeable about military equipment of the foreign countries. I knew the brands, the names of the tanks and jets of every NATO country. You know, you tell me it's the UK, I'll tell you that's tanks called Challengers, and jets are European Eurofighters or Typhoons. France will be Mirage. Oh, I forgot the name of the tanks. It was some French name. I cannot come up right now. You know, Germany, of course, Leopards. So yeah, I could name pretty much all the tanks, all the jets of every country, including the United States, of course. And I remember being fascinated with A-10 Warthog attack plane, although I found it quite ugly. And I don't know why, but I always thought that the most beautiful Western military jet was F-8 Crusader. I just thought it was so beautiful. And the name of the French tank just came up in my memory. I believe it was called Leclerc. And I said I wasn't looking up, not cheating here, just that's what I remembered. French Leclerc. And as I mentioned earlier, there was a lot of anti-NATO propaganda in this magazine as well as generally in the Soviet media. So I grew up knowing that NATO was aggressive pact and aimed at the Soviet Union and its allies from the Warsaw Pact. So it was really bizarre to discover something very particular in this magazine, Зарубежное военное обозрение. So I was quite puzzled when I discovered on the pages of this magazine that Western countries, NATO members, were desperately developing more and more anti-tank weapons, handheld. They had actually anti-tank helicopters, and of course at that time I had no idea that Soviet Union had just in Eastern Germany over 7,000 tanks. So for me it's like, why are they so scared of tanks? Why all this equipment? It's just designed to kill the tank. And can you imagine the cost of maintaining and running such a huge tank army in peaceful times? No wonder Soviet Union had collapsed. But of course the coolest thing ever happened to me with this magazine was this photo. A friend of mine brought this picture. He just ripped a page out of the magazine and he asked me dude, is that you? And I looked and my jaw dropped, because the guy looked very similar to myself, although he was dressed in a NATO outfit. And I attached my photo from those years. I think it's ninth grade. And similarities are really striking. I think that's called doppelganger. Ganger? Oh my God. So anyway, it's amazing how similar faces are, but it's not me. It's just some dude posing in a NATO gear from 1980s. Surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, this magazine is still in business. It's being published by Russian Ministry of Defense. They changed the cover. Instead of generic blue cover, it now has color pictures in the front. It still talks about foreign weapons. And of course, it still probably has a lot of Russian propaganda. But back in the Soviet days, it was probably my favorite magazine. I learned a lot from it, and I probably knew more about Western weapons, about Soviet weapons, because they didn't talk much about Soviet tanks and everything else. It was kind of kept somewhat secret, but yeah, we knew plenty about Western tanks, Western jets, and stuff like that. And of course, it'll be interesting to see what this magazine writes about war in Ukraine. Of course, Putin calls it special military operation. To see their unbiased analysis of the events in Ukraine, since they expected to take over Kyiv in 3 days and eastern Ukraine in 1 month. And now we have the third year going on of this war, and Ukraine just entered the Kursk region. Well, my friends, I hope you find this video interesting, and if you did, please don't forget to like it. Otherwise, we'll talk to you soon. До побачення. Goodbye.